Of those boyish days I have little more to tell, because everything went quietly, as the world for the most part does with us. I began to work at the farm in earnest, and tried to help my mother, and when I remembered Lorna Doone, it seemed no more than the thought of a dream, which I could hardly call to mind. Now who cares to know how many bushels of wheat we grew to the acre, or how the cattle milched till we ate them, or what the turn of the seasons was? But my stupid self seemed like to be the biggest of all the cattle; for having much to look after the sheep, and being always in kind appetite, I grew 4 inches longer in every year of my farming, and a matter of 2 inches wider, until there was no man of my size to be seen elsewhere upon Exmoor. Let that pass. What odds to any how tall or wide I be? There is no Doone's door at Plover's Barrows, and if there were, I could never go through it. They vexed me so much about my size, long before I had completed it, girding at me with paltry jokes, whose wit was good only to stay at home, that I grew shamefaced about the matter, and feared to encounter a looking glass. But mother was very proud, and said she never could have too much of me. The worst of all to make me ashamed of bearing my head so high, a thing I saw no way to help, for I never could hang my chin down, and my back was like a gatepost whenever I tried to bend it; the worst of all was our little Eliza, who never could come to a size herself, though she had the wine from the sacrament at Easter and Allhallowmas, only to be small and skinny, sharp and clever crookedly. Not that her body was out of the straight, being too small for that perhaps, but that her wit was full of corners, jagged and strange and uncomfortable. You never could tell what she might say next; and I like not that kind of women. Now God forgive me for talking so of my own father's daughter, and so much the more by reason that my father could not help it. The right way is to face the matter, and then be sorry for every one. My mother fell grievously on a slide, which John Fry had made nigh the apple room door, and hidden with straw from the stable, to cover his own great idleness. My father laid John's nose on the ice, and kept him warm in spite of it; but it was too late for Eliza. She was born next day with more mind than body, the worst thing that can befall a man. But Annie, my other sister, was now a fine fair girl, beautiful to behold. I could look at her by the fireside for an hour together, when I was not too sleepy, and think of my dear father. And she would do the same thing by me, only wait the between of the blazes. Her hair was done up in a knot behind, but some would fall over her shoulders; and the dancing of the light was sweet to see through a man's eyelashes. There never was a face that showed the light or the shadow of feeling, as if the heart were sun to it, more than our dear Annie's did. To look at her carefully, you might think that she was not dwelling on anything; and then she would know you were looking at her, and those eyes would tell all about it. God knows that I try to be simple enough, to keep to His meaning in me, and not make the worst of His children. Yet often have I been put to shame, and ready to bite my tongue off, after speaking amiss of anybody, and letting out my littleness, when suddenly mine eyes have met the pure soft gaze of Annie. As for the Doones, they were thriving still, and no one to come against them, except indeed by word of mouth, to which they lent no heed whatever. Complaints were made from time to time, both in high and low quarters, as the rank might be of the people robbed; and once or twice in the highest of all, to wit the King himself. But His Majesty made a good joke about it, not meaning any harm, I doubt; and was so much pleased with himself thereupon, that he quite forgave the mischief. Moreover, the main authorities were a long way off, and the Chancellor had no cattle on Exmoor; and as for my lord the Chief Justice, some rogue had taken his silver spoons, whereupon his lordship swore that never another man would he hang, until he had that one by the neck. Therefore the Doones went on as they listed, and none saw fit to meddle with them. For the only man who would have dared to come to close quarters with them, that is to say Tom Faggus, himself was a quarry for the law, if ever it should be unhooded. Moreover, he had transferred his business to the neighbourhood of Wantage, in the county of Berks, where he found the climate drier, also good downs and commons, excellent for galloping, and richer yeomen than ours be, and better roads to rob them on. Some folk, who had wiser attended to their own affairs, said that I, being sizable now, and able to shoot not badly, ought to do something against those Doones, and show what I was made of. But for a time I was very bashful, shaking when called upon suddenly, and blushing as deep as a maiden. For my strength was not come upon me, and mayhap I had grown in front of it. And again, though I loved my father still, and would fire at a word about him, I saw not how it would do him good for me to harm his injurers. Some races are of a revengeful kind, and will for years pursue their wrong, and sacrifice this world and the next for a moment's foul satisfaction. But methinks this comes of some black blood, perverted and never purified. And I doubt but men of true English birth are stouter than so to be twisted, though some of the women may take that turn, if their own life runs unkindly. Let that pass. I am never good at talking of things beyond me. All I know is, that if I had met the Doone who had killed my father, I would gladly have thrashed him black and blue, supposing I were able; but would never have fired a gun at him, unless he began that game with me, or fell upon more of my family, or were violent among women. And to do them justice, my mother and Annie were equally kind and gentle; but Eliza would flame and grow white with contempt, and not trust herself to speak to us. Now a strange thing came to pass that winter, when I was 21 years old, a very strange thing, which affrighted the rest, and made me feel uncomfortable. Not that there was anything in it, to do harm to any one, only that none could explain it, except by attributing it to the devil. The weather was very mild and open, and scarcely any snow fell; at any rate none lay on the ground, even for an hour, in the highest part of Exmoor, a thing which I knew not before nor since, as long as I can remember. But the nights were wonderfully dark, as though with no stars in the heaven; and all day long the mists were rolling upon the hills and down them, as if the whole land were a wash house. The moorland was full of snipes and teal, and curlews flying and crying, and lapwings flapping heavily, and ravens hovering round dead sheep. Yet no redshanks, nor dotterel, and scarce any golden plovers, of which we have great store generally; but vast lonely birds that cried at night, and moved the whole air with their pinions; yet no man ever saw them. It was dismal as well as dangerous now for any man to go fowling, which of late I loved much in the winter, because the fog would come down so thick that the pan of the gun was reeking, and the fowl out of sight ere the powder kindled; and then the sound of the piece was so dead, that the shooter feared harm, and glanced over his shoulder. But the danger, of course, was far less in this, than in losing of the track, and falling into the mires, or over the brim of a precipice. Nevertheless, I must needs go out, being young and very stupid, and feared of being afraid; a fear which a wise man has long cast by, having learned of the manifold dangers which ever and ever encompass us. And beside this folly and wildness of youth, perchance there was something, I know not what, of the joy we have in uncertainty. Mother, in fear of my missing home (though for that matter I could smell supper, when hungry, through 100 lanyards of fog), my dear mother, who thought of me 10 times for one thought about herself, gave orders to ring the great sheep bell, which hung above the pigeon cote, every 10 minutes of the day; and the sound came through the plaits of fog, and I was vexed about it, like the letters of a copy book. It reminded me, too, of Blundell's bell, and the grief to go into school again. But during those 2 months of fog, for we had it all the winter, the saddest and the heaviest thing was to stand beside the sea; to be upon the beach yourself, and see the long waves coming in; to know that they are long waves, but only see a piece of them; and to hear them lifting roundly, swelling over smooth green rocks, plashing down in the hollow corners, but bearing on all the same as ever, soft and sleek and sorrowful.